Welcome back, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the show as much as I am. Welcome to our 12 o'clock panel discussion. And for this event, I'm joined by three panelists. On my left, I have Steve Moore from the think tank VolteFace, Antonio Costanzo from the Canadian pharmaceutical firm Nuuvera, and we have Ed from FastForward, the investment firm. Can I just say, if you have your apps with you, you are invited to submit questions to the panelists through the application. And about 20 minutes into our discussion, my colleague Tim Corcoran is going to hand me a piece of paper with your questions. So I will endeavor to relay your questions to my panelists. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is just to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves very briefly and give a bit of background on their perspective, where they're coming from in terms of this discussion and this debate, and what their particular organization is doing in this field. So if I could start with you, Steve.
Yep, fine. Good afternoon. It is afternoon. 2 years ago, I set up a new think tank and research center in London to explore alternatives to existing drug policies in the UK. There are quite a few of these organizations around the world with a very strong focus on global innovation. We decided to take a deep dive into the issues in the UK. We have a particular focus on cannabis. To some extent, cannabis is the only game in town, particularly in relation to business. We have a project that we're launching in June, which is probably the largest ever public inquiry into cannabis in all its forms, and we're basically examining the efficacy of the current legal status of cannabis in the UK, how it's enforced, and all the related public policies around cannabis. Our argument is steering us towards a view that the best way to focus on cannabis is to follow the example of Trudeau in Canada.
Okay, Steve, we'll dig into that a little bit deeper as we continue. So basically, you're a policy forum, and you're liaising with the politicians and the opinion formers in order to drive this debate forward.
In order to reframe the debate around how we treat cannabis, yes.
Okay, that's great. Antonio, could you say something about Nuuvera?
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, speaking too loud. So my name is Antonio Costanzo. I work for a Canadian company called Nuuvera. Nuuvera is in the cannabis business. I've been with the company for 9 months now. Nuuvera is a publicly listed company. We recently announced that we are about to be bought by another cannabis company called Afria. So in terms of convincing you to invest into Nuuvera, I would not do that today. But I will certainly try and argue why this industry, the cannabis industry, is extremely interesting from an investment perspective at the time being.
And your firm is quoted on the
it is
on the London market.
On the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Okay, the TSX. Okay, Ed Mcdermott, FastForward.
Thanks, Victor. I sit here in my capacity as a director of FastForward Innovations. We're an AIM-listed company with the ticker FFWD. We are the first AIM-listed company to make an investment into a medical marijuana business. And it so happens to be Nuuvera, which is the Canadian company, NUU, which we have invested in, some $3 million. This was in the seed round pre their listing.
Thank you, Ed. And I know that any delegates who were here 2 years ago may have heard a presentation by Lorne Ebony.
You would have, yes.
Your CEO.
Lorne is actually the CEO of FastForward Innovations, and he also serves as the president of Nuuvera. I'm correct, the president?
So, as I understand it, you're investing across a whole wide range of technologies, not just pharmaceuticals.
Yes, we're not just involved in life sciences. We have investments in we have a portfolio of assets, like a traditional venture capital fund, in a number of different technologies, but we really like the medical cannabis space. I must stress the medical cannabis space.
And I'm aware of the fact, as many of you will be, that FastForward has returned quite some very substantial returns for shareholders over the last 5 years or so.
That's correct. We've had a pretty good run, I would say. We've obviously having a number of private investments means that generally it can be quite hard to express the true value of those investments to the market. However, with Nuuvera being a listed company, we paid $1 a share for our stock, and currently the shares trade at $5.90.
Well, that's something I think we need to accentuate.
Absolutely.
Okay, we know who you are. We know that you've got expertise in this field. I just want to pose the question to contextualize this discussion. Why is this debate about legalization of cannabis for both medical and recreational purposes, for marijuana, why is this happening now, at this particular moment? And we know that, if I'm correct, there are, I think, 9 US states which have taken steps of varying degrees towards legalization. It's under discussion in Ireland, amongst other Western countries.
It's under discussion in numerous European countries, particularly in relation to medical cannabis.
Is it Uruguay has already?
Uruguay's got a socialistic model which is basically a state-run kind of cannabis sector. I mean, the biggest game in town, I think, is Canada. I think Canada, because the problem with the US market is it hasn't got federal clearance. So it doesn't actually have the hallmarks of capitalism, no patents, no banking. But I mean, there's some very exciting opportunities in the US. But I think Canada presents the model the way forward. I mean, Canada's not a country with a tradition of making reckless public policy. Canada's taken 3.5 years.
Just to be clear, in Canada, is this likely to happen on a province-by-province basis, or does it happen at the federal level?
It's happening at the federal level. I mean, Trudeau included it in his manifesto 3 years ago, and the licenses for grows come from the federal government. How it's retailed, is it licensed at a kind of provincial or at a state level? Right.
So obviously, Nuuvera, you're based in Toronto, as I understand.
Correct.
Can you just take us through the background to what actually precipitated the launch of this company?
Well, the founders of Nuuvera, a while ago, I would say a year and a half ago, more or less, started looking at the cannabis industry, and they saw that there was an opportunity. So they started researching the existing companies to look for an investment opportunity. And in the end, they decided that they didn't find exactly what they were looking for, so they said, okay, let's set up our own company and do what we think should be done to grow this in this industry, which is exactly what they did. They did that a bit more than a year ago, and within a matter of a few months, the company was listed, and now it has been already sold, or if you prefer, it's almost, we see it more as a merger than as a sell, because we are merging with Aphria. Aphria is one of the historical and most large producers of cannabis in Canada, an early investor also into Nuuvera. And so Aphria is buying 100% of Nuuvera now, and the two companies will become one. The two management teams will become one, and we believe that today Aphria and Nuuvera together will be in the position to be one of the world leaders, one of the 4 or 5 companies that will have an edge at worldwide level compared to the rest of the competitors.
So, Antonio, just to recap the timescale on this, you were founded precisely when? That was
March 2017, so a year ago.
Okay, and when did you launch on the Toronto market?
On the 9th of January, and we announced the deal with Aphria on the 29th of January.
And when will that go through?
It's a matter of probably days, weeks. We don't know. There is no exact date. The process is ongoing, so the closing should happen sometime soon.
Okay, and you will trade under the new name of Aphria, effectively?
Yes, correct. Aphria will become the single company, and Nuuvera will be within Aphria.
And I want to ask you about your products and how they will be commercialized in a bit more detail in just one moment. But I want to ask Ed Mcdermott, how did FastForward, which is a diversified investment company, obviously looking at largely at technology. I remember Lorne Ebony talking about artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, robotics. What brought FastForward into the cannabis marijuana market?
Well, we felt there was a global secular trend towards legalization. On that basis, we're an investment fund. We feel there's a lot of technology as well behind the medical marijuana space, particularly
Right.
In terms of applications for delivering those products. It just made sense to us, and obviously Lorne, being involved with Nuuvera and being part of that vision, you know, it was a sensible move in our.
Okay, and one that has proved rather profitable.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we're going to receive 60 cents per share from this AFRIA deal, plus 0.3546 of a share in AFRIA. So our Nuuvera shares will become AFRIA shares, hopefully in due course, plus we'll see some cash.
When did you invest in Nuuvera?
We invested in early 2017. Sort of.
So at the time of the stock market listing?
We were one of the seed investors.
So you were on the ground floor? Yeah.
We were in at the ground floor, and we will hold for till it reaches the maturity. But we believe generally, as Antonio was saying, that it is a merger rather than a sale, because we believe the combined entity will be extremely valuable.
And can I ask you, if it's not confidential or a commercial secret,
can try.
what is your return to date on this investment?
Well, I think it's a difficult one, because if we were looking at pure Nuuvera shares today, they traded last night, I believe they closed around $5.90. So on $1 a share, that's a $4.9 premium. But obviously, we're not looking at it as a return today, because, as I said, I think we feel there's some way to go. The only difficulty we may face is if Nuuvera and AFRIA start to sell product to the recreational market.
Okay, that
would be preventative for us.
Very good moment to come back to Steve Moore on the policy side, because what we have effectively here is an investment activity which is focused on medical applications of cannabis stroke marijuana.
Yeah.
And I think most of the audience will be aware that these drugs have been around in one form or another for a very long time.
10,000 years.
Okay. And
is that all?
is there evidence of that?
Yeah.
And I'm certainly aware that they've been used and are used in pain management.
Queen Victoria used it for period pains.
As a royal endorsement.
Okay. What are the full range of medical applications, actually, that prospectively?
I mean, the principal driver of the recreational market has been the development of medical schemes. So, and they've used in Canada that was secured 10 years ago through a Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah.
So essentially, the Supreme Court ruling facilitated the creation of the medical marijuana sector in Canada, and it's the lobbying and political organization of the legal companies in that market which has driven the recreational market.
So medical use of marijuana is already legal in
Yes, it has been.
Canada.
Yeah, it's been in over half the states in the United States, and in Canada it's been legal for 10 years. Now, what you can do in Europe, no, on the whole, the one to watch in Europe is Germany. Germany's has sort of moved in the last year to reschedule cannabis. The problem is really to do with rescheduling. All drug laws fall under the auspices of UN conventions on narcotics, and that dictates the scheduling. But the UN has asked the World Health Organization to look at cannabis scheduling, and they're going to report it this year.
I want to ask you about the controversial issue of recreational use in a moment, but just focusing on the medical applications, can you tell us something, Antonio, about the actual products that you're seeking to commercialize?
Sure. Well, the interesting part about medical use of cannabis is that for 60, 70 years, cannabis was totally illegal in almost every country in the world. So there was no research around the medical use of cannabis that was done with recent and modern technologies or recent and modern knowledge of medicines. So in the past few years, when some governments or judges decided that medical use of cannabis was to be allowed in given jurisdictions, all of a sudden, the scientific community started looking at this opportunity as a way to introduce new ways, new forms of products, of medical products based on cannabis. So today, we are at the very beginning of this process whereby scientists are understanding the details of this plant, because in the plant, in the cannabis plant, there are more than 100 actives. We know a little bit about 2 of them. The rest we know very little about. So it's really, really early stages. Today, to go back to your question, it depends again on regulations and decisions made by countries. In some countries, the product can actually be smoked also for medical purposes, which is something that we don't believe in. In Canada, you cannot smoke it for medical purpose. You can only use it in the form of an oil, for instance. In other countries, you can use it in the form of a tea bag, for instance, so you can drink it. So there's various forms.
What is the form that you are commercializing currently?
It's mainly oils. Oils.
Okay.
We believe that oils and derivatives, so derivatives of the cannabis plant, are the way forward. In particular, tablets, pills, soft gels, because the dosage is very precise. Whereas if you use the flower, the plant, it's much more difficult to have a precise dosage.
And this would be a medicine that you can buy over the counter in a pharmacy?
No,
or?
you need a prescription. You need a
Okay.
doctor's prescription, and then you go to a pharmacy and get it. And again, it varies from country to country. In Canada, for instance, the producers of medical cannabis are allowed to sell directly to the patient based on a prescription by a doctor.
Okay, and typically what types of medical condition would this be treating?
Chronic pain is one, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, glaucoma, cancer treatment, or side effects of medicines that are taken for cancer treatment. And it's only the beginning, as I was saying. So we hear about research, and we know about research that is looking into the possible effects of some of the actives of cannabis on cancer, to cure cancer. So not just to focus on the side effects of the medicines taken for cancer, but actually to cure cancer.
Is there any evidence that
We're beginning to
cannabinoids...
see that. And the studies are actually looking at that evidence.
As I just became aware earlier, when I was looking into this, there is a medical research unit at the University of Oxford,
Correct.
which is called the Cannabinoid Research Unit, who are looking into the interaction of these chemicals on, if I've got this correctly, the endocannabinoid system
Correct.
within the brain.
Correct.
And the applications could be quite extensive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you have these research capabilities within your firm?
We do, and we and Afria as well has already started doing some research projects, and I think the whole industry is going down that route, because if you like, we have different pillars within the cannabis industry. You have the recreational pillar, which is one, and will have a life of its own. Then you have the medical use of marijuana, of cannabis, which is the second pillar, and then you have the third pillar, which is cannabis as a medicine. And there is a difference between cannabis as a medicine and medical use of cannabis. Medical use of cannabis means that you use the product or some of the derivatives of the product for medical purposes. Developing a medicine based on cannabis, it's a different story. There are some companies that have already started doing that, one of which actually is a UK company, and more companies...
Which one is it?
GW Pharmaceuticals. And more companies are...
It's listed?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
Yes, it
They
is.
originally listed in the UK, I believe, but
Correct.
they're now in Canada. But they had the first UK drug called Sativex.
Correct.
Very
Right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Okay.
led the way.
And
Largest grower of cannabis in the world.
Sorry.
Largest grower of cannabis in the world.
Yes.
Yes, in the UK.
Yeah, in the UK. In
Yeah.
the UK. Not many
Believe it
people
or
know
not.
that, yes.
Surprising. Okay, so let's grasp this nettle of recreational use. Ed Mcdermott, you told me that you would not be permitted to invest in a company which produced these products for recreational use.
Absolutely correct. I think in the UK, if it's not something that's capable of being legal in the UK, it would be considered proceeds of crime. So if we were invested in a company that started selling to recreational users, we would effectively be, even though that company is legal to operate in the state or country that it is operating in, we would be benefiting from proceeds of crime because it could not be legal in the UK.
Okay.
But because it, in theory, could be legal for medicinal use in the UK, we are allowed to invest in territories that...
And what about a grey area? If it was available for medical use, but you had reason to suppose people were using it recreationally, would that be an issue for you?
I think it probably would be. Certainly it would be a public relations issue and potentially a moral or ethical dilemma. And I should think the regulators over here would be questioning us as to whether we should be invested in that company, and probably as a fund we would look to divest pretty quickly.
That's clear.
And we would be under pressure to do so as well. Absolutely.
That's absolutely clear. Now, Steve Moore, in terms of the recreational use, what we're seeing in the United States is some states, I believe it's Colorado, has had legalized...
That's the most mature market, yeah.
...cannabis for 5 years. Okay, now you will be aware of some reports coming out of Colorado to the effect that there is a major downside to this in terms of social outcomes.
Well, I think in relation to Colorado, is all the spotlights on Colorado. It's the most mature market. I mean, the problem with the reports so far is there's no baseline data. That's the problem. It's just not, it's not in all US states. It's not just that we've got dodgy data. In most cases, we don't have any baseline data. So I think it's, at the moment, the reports largely have a political provenance. People who want to stop marijuana being legalized can produce reports to say that there's been a rise in hospital admissions, a rise in drug driving prosecutions. The industry itself probably will support reports that suggest that there's been a small increase in consumption among adults, a reduction in the number among kids. So at the moment, it's all conjecture. My personal view is look at Canada. Canada is the most mature model. Canada is the model that's been driven through with the police, with public health, with mental health, with educators. That's not the case in US states.
Okay. And Antonio, I mean, is there any part of your business plan which would entertain producing products for recreational use? Or is that completely outside the purview of what you're doing?
No, it is part of the plan in the sense that when an opportunity arises, such as in Canada, where recreational use will be most likely allowed, we believe, by the end of the summer, August, September, something like that, we will, of course, as a company, now I'm talking about Nuuvera, but Nuuvera will not exist at that time, most likely will be Afria, but any company in the cannabis space in Canada would be crazy not to, from an investment perspective, not to go into the recreational market. So yes, there will be also an offer for the recreational market, which will be separate from the offer for the medical market, so different products.
It would be a separate entity with completely different products?
Not necessarily a separate entity, that I cannot answer that question, but certainly certain different types of products for the recreational market and for the medical market, for obvious reasons.
Okay. Steve, when people look at recreational use, this is an addictive substance, is it not? We hear all kinds of studies to the effect that it increases the incidence of schizophrenia in users. I mean, surely this is something we would treat very carefully before legalizing it.
Yes, and I think you have to treat it carefully. I think the argument that's prevailed in Canada is very interesting, because the argument that's prevailed in Canada is that the best way of dealing with the harmful effects of cannabis use are to take back control. If I can borrow from the Brexiteers line, I think take back control. So I think what they've basically concluded is that they are no longer in a position to police this effectively. I think that applies here in the UK. In the UK, the number of prosecutions for cannabis possession have halved in the last 10 years. And actually the number of hospital admissions has doubled in that period.
What's the reason for that?
The reason for that is that there's been an evolution in terms of the how cannabis is cultivated. Up until the early 1990s, most cannabis was imported into the UK from West Africa, North Africa, from the West Indies. Increasingly, with the evolution of hydroponic technology, most cannabis is now grown at home. I mean, they kind of euphemistically call it cannabis farms, but it's people's baths.
Efficient way to grow it,
efficient way to grow, yes. You know, it's efficient way to grow. You hear stories of lots of people using bidolettes to create little cannabis farms.
Does it also mean that I assume that, well, probably more... Sorry, I'm stealing your job here,
Go for it.
That's okay.
Obviously, as an investor, we're incredibly interested in all of these facets of the business, but I assume it means you can control the product a lot more if you're growing it in a hydroponic setting.
Absolutely.
Ed, I've got a question which I'm going to give to you
Oh, fantastic.
from audience member Jay, and I'm just going to summarize this because it's quite a long question. Can you share your insights into what particular aspects of a cannabis marijuana orientated pharmaceutical company you would look for when you're doing your due diligence?
Well, I think you want a company in the same way that you would look at any company. You want to make sure that the company has sufficient capital to complete its investment strategy and actually action that. You want to make sure that you have a team that know what they're doing, and you want to make sure that the R&D and the legal department of said company also knows what they're doing. And obviously for us, it would have to be a medically focused business, or we simply would not, we wouldn't be able to get it past our regulators on the London Stock Exchange.
So when you looked at Nuuvera, you looked first at the R&D capacity and the...
Yeah, we looked at their business plan effectively, which we felt was international. It wasn't simply just looking at Canada as an insular market and trying to be another Canadian medical marijuana producer. They had a global strategy, which they actually implemented that very, very quickly, and I believe that's why the deal with Afria has come together so quickly.
Right.
So yes, I think you have to look at businesses that you, A, believe in the people, believe in the business plan, and you know that they can sufficiently raise the capital. And certainly, knowing Lorne as I do, we knew that the capital was there, we knew that we would be investing, and we knew a number of other investors would be following suit.
That's clear. Now, time is short, so I'm just going to take a final question from the audience, which is, I'm afraid I don't have a name, and I'm going to throw this open to the panel. So please feel free to answer this in whatever, not necessarily with your investment hat on, but at a human level. The question is a good one. Is why is recreational use a problem? Could it not be classified as self-medication? Isn't it just a conditioned view based on current laws? Steve?
I mean, I think it's perfectly possible to imagine the creation of a responsible adult market for recreational cannabis use. That's what they're doing in Canada. I think under strict licensing and regulation. I think what isn't, I feel acceptable is the way that we're treating it here in this country, where we've basically got virtually no drugs education, no regulation, virtually no policing, and about 2 million people consuming a product that is on the whole pretty potent, and there is an alternative to that. And I think Canada showed, Trudeau showed some political courage by gripping this issue. We'll know, and when we sit here in 2 years' time, we'll have a better idea of whether that's worked or not. My sense is, having spent a lot of time in Canada in the last 18 months, is that I think this will work rather well, and I think it will set the industry standard.
Okay. Antonio, can you handle that one?
Look, this question about allowing recreational use of any drugs, I think has been out there since they were made illegal, right? 60, 70, 80 years ago. And it will be for a long time going forward. It's an ethical issue, it's a moral issue. Individuals have different views on it, and it will remain like that for a number of years. What is quite evident is that there is a widespread demand for a change in existing legislation. We've seen that at government level, we've seen that at public level, so there's a lot of strong public support for a change in legislations across different countries. When I joined the company 9 months ago, I made up my mind and I said, I think that we're going to see a big evolution in this cannabis industry within 5 to 6 years. 9 months later, I was totally wrong. The evolution has been so fast in the first 9 months of my experience in this industry that I can't even imagine what it's going to be like in 5 years.
Yeah.
I thought at the beginning that we wouldn't see the legalization of recreational use in Europe for 5, 6 years. I believe now that if we don't see recreational use being legalized in at least one country in Europe within 24 months, I would be extremely surprised. And
Which country might be first?
I would, if I had to pick a lot of countries, I would say one of Malta, Portugal, Germany,
Greece.
and Holland.
And Greece, maybe? Greece.
And Greece,
Okay.
probably, yes. One
Very
of 5.
interesting. Okay, Ed McDermott, why couldn't people self-medicate?
I think it has issues. You know, on one hand, I'd love to see the proceeds of this product taken away from crime cartels. I'd rather see the government benefiting from a taxation point of view. You know, and ultimately from a healthcare point of view, people should be able to do this. You know, you could liken this to alcohol many decades ago. It was illegal. You know, it was considered an evil in the same way.
Just a final question to you, Ed. I mean, could you justify this as an ethical investment to one of your clients?
I think that would be a difficult stance for me to take as an investor and as an investment advisor.
Yep.
And as a sort of quasi-fund manager, but I'll let other people decide that, and then I think we will follow suit. But certainly from an investment point of view, we would love to see it become legalized across Europe from a medical point of view. I think that is going to be the biggest market in the world. I think our healthcare systems, the NHS, and other similar healthcare systems in Europe, it's going to happen, I believe. And I think for us to be invested in that space is a fantastic place to be.
Thank you, Ed McDermott. Antonio, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. I hope you found some food for thought there. Obviously a very controversial area. Thank you for your kind attention.